Why is it that, a fully grown adult will spend 40 hours a week just absolutely stressed out of their mind at a demanding high-pressure job?
Right. Just completely drained.
Exactly. Only to come home on a Friday evening and voluntarily subject themselves to this rigorous, highly volatile, and quite frankly, stressful chemistry experiment of baking artisan sourdough bread.
Oh, I know. It's wild.
I mean, think about that paradox for a second. We crave the weekend to escape the grind, right?
Yeah.
And the minute we get there, we invent a brand new unpaid job for ourselves.
Yeah, one that requires setting alarms at, 4 in the morning?
Yes, just to feed a jar of fermented flour. It's crazy. And today we actually have a piece of source material that accidentally uncovers this whole modern crisis of adulthood.
Disguised as a morning radio-style chat, no less.
Right.
It really is a brilliant paradox to open with, because when you look at the surface of the text we're examining today, you would never assume it holds the key to understanding our deep-seated psychological anxieties.
Let alone our neurological capacity for memory, which we will get to.
Right, yeah. The document we have on the table is actually a transcript from an educational series, specifically the Learning English podcast, episode 2.
Titled Hobbies and Pastimes.
Exactly.
Which sounds completely mundane. I mean, if you told me we were doing a deep dive on an English as a second language transcript about pottery and baking.
You'd expect a manual for a refrigerator or something?
Totally. You know the drill, right? A sterile list of vocabulary words. Maybe a monotone instructor telling you to memorize conjugation tables.
And absolutely zero narrative heartbeat.
None at all. But that is the exact opposite of what is happening here.
It really is. The authors of this curriculum have done something, highly subversive. They've constructed this dialogue between two characters, Emma and John.
Just casually catching up on their weekends.
Right. But beneath that breezy banter is this meticulously engineered psychological framework.
It's so clever.
They are basically exploiting the friction between expectation and reality to map complex vocabulary directly onto your emotional centers.
It is entirely stealthy. And so our mission today is to completely deconstruct this text for you.
Tear it down to the studs.
Exactly. We are not going to just walk through a cute story about a loaf of bread and a lopsided clay pot. We're uncovering two distinct elements here.
Right. First, we are extracting the profound psychological insights this conversation reveals about how you and I process failure.
Why we cling to the illusion of control.
Yeah, and our desperate, almost tragic need for unstructured play.
And second, we are reverse engineering the hidden linguistic strategies this text employs, like how it permanently installs high-level vocabulary into a human brain.
We are looking at a masterclass in both behavioral psychology and neurological pedagogy.
Operating entirely under the radar. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the first archetype of leisure presented in the text, which is Emma and her sourdough saga.
Ah, yes. Emma.
So Emma is the host of this language program within our text, and she kicks off the conversation by detailing her weekend passion project.
Which she has thrown herself headfirst into. Artisan sourdough baking.
And we really need to pay close attention to the specific verbs and adjectives she selects to describe this process, right?
Absolutely. Because she doesn't just say, I baked some bread. She describes cultivating a wild yeast culture.
Cultivating.
Yeah. She talks about the rigid schedule of feeding the starter. She details the physical, repetitive action of folding the dough.
It is a highly ritualized process.
Very much so.
Her vocabulary choices are actually what really caught my eye here. She calls this hobby meticulous.
Right.
She says the entire endeavor demands absolute precision and patience. And then she claims this highly rigid structure is meditative.
Yeah, let's dissect the psychology of that claim for a second. Yeah. Why would someone find a meticulous, precision-demanding task meditative?
It sounds stressful to me.
Right, but when we look at the sociology of modern work and the concept of the daily grind, a phrase the text introduces early on, by the way, we see this pervasive lack of agency.
Oh, for sure. You send emails into the void.
You attend meetings that result in more meetings. You manipulate spreadsheets, but you rarely see a tangible physical outcome from your labor.
You are fundamentally alienated from the product of your work.
Precisely.
And the rules of the corporate world, or just modern adult life in general, are entirely opaque.
Well, completely.
Like the economy shifts, a client changes their mind, or a pandemic hits, and suddenly all your hard work is invalidated.
Right. You did everything right, and you still failed.
That ambiguity is exhausting.
It really is. So Emma seeks out an environment where the rules are absolute. The laws of chemistry and biology do not care about the economy or office politics.
That's a great point.
If Emma measures her flour down to the gram, if she maintains the ambient temperature at exactly 74 degrees.
If she executes the fold at the precise fermentation window.
Exactly. The universe rewards her with a loaf of bread. It is a profound human desire for controlled, incremental success.
So the meditation she experiences isn't the absence of thought.
No, it's the comfort of a guaranteed causal relationship. A plus B equals C. It's an escape from the terrifying ambiguity of modern life.
Wait, hold on, though. I have a major pushback on Emma's definition of relaxation here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because her co-host, John, immediately calls her out in the text. He compares her sourdough starter to a high-maintenance pet.
He does, yeah.
And I completely agree with him. If you are stressing over feeding a jar of yeast before you've even had your morning coffee, I really question whether you've actually escaped the daily grind.
That's a fair point.
Haven't you just built a second, equally demanding office in your kitchen? Like, does demanding precision really equate to leisure?
Well, that is the core contradiction of the modern hobbyist, isn't it? You are equating leisure with idleness.
What do you mean?
Like the idea that relaxing means lying on a beach doing nothing. But for a specific psychological profile, idleness is actually panic-inducing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Because it leaves a vacuum for anxiety to rush in.
Exactly. So for Emma, engaging in a high-maintenance task isn't a disguised form of work. It's a controlled simulation of work.
A controlled simulation of work. Wow.
Right. It provides the neurological reward of solving a problem without the existential dread of losing her livelihood if she messes it up.
That makes total sense. But, I mean, the text doesn't let her coast on that illusion of control. The authors deliberately write in a history of profound failure for her.
Yeah, she didn't just walk into the kitchen and instantly become a master baker.
Not at all. The recounting of her failures is crucial. She uses highly evocative sensory language here.
She describes her initial attempts as deeply humbling.
Right, she said her first loaf had the density of a brick.
A brick.
And her second attempt was so utterly devoid of life, it could have passed for a pizza base.
The density of a brick. That is such a visceral image of defeat, you know?
It is. You spend weeks curating this wild yeast, setting alarms, measuring water temperatures, and the universe hands you a brick. The chemistry betrayed her.
Well, but did the chemistry betray her, or does she fail to meet the rigorous demands of the chemistry?
Oh, that's a good distinction.
Psychologically, it's very important. When a loaf of bread turns into a brick, the failure is transparent. It's entirely her fault.
Right, she misjudged the proofing time, or the starter wasn't active enough.
Yeah, and there is an odd comfort in a failure that is entirely logical. It means the system still works. She just needs to improve her execution.
Which sets up her ultimate triumph perfectly, because she doesn't quit.
No, she endures the brick, she endures the flat pizza base, and she tells John that this weekend, she finally cracked the code.
She achieved the perfect loaf. And again, the sensory details the text provides are incredibly rich here.
She describes a beautiful, crisp crust.
And an open, airy crumb. She practically reveres it, calling it a thing of beauty.
This narrative arc is vital for the listener's engagement. We are witnessing the payoff of incremental mastery.
She conquered the wild yeast.
Yes. She submitted to the strict, uncompromising rules of the universe, absorbed the harsh feedback of her early failures, and was finally rewarded.
With a tangible, edible proof of her competence.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate validation of her need for control. But here is the trick, and this is why I love this text. Emma's triumph of precision is only half of the story.
Right.
The authors establish this quiet, contained, highly successful environment for a very specific reason. They need a baseline.
A contrast.
Yes, because to fully understand the spectrum of human leisure, we have to pivot to the exact opposite side of the psychological coin.
We have to look at her co-host, John.
And his spectacular, unmitigated lack of control.
The structural pivot here is just brilliant. We move from the sterile, predictable environment of a kitchen scale to a tactile environment defined by chaos and mess.
We move to the vortex of mud.
The vortex of mud, yes.
So we learn that John, in what he literally calls a moment of temporary insanity, enrolled in a weekend beginner's pottery class.
And the text wastes absolutely no time letting us know this was a disaster.
None. Right at the top of the transcript, Emma points out a physical smudge of clay on John's ear.
The evidence of his failure is literally painted on his body.
It's so funny.
What's fascinating here is how the text explores the massive gap between human expectation and physical reality.
Yeah, John confesses that he went into this class with a highly romanticized cinematic vision of himself.
He specifically references that famous 1990s movie scene with the potter's wheel. We all know the one.
Oh, with the ghost.
Yeah.
Yes. He pictured himself executing this graceful, fluid, artistic creation.
He had the ultimate fantasy of effortless artistic genius.
You thought he was just going to sit down and inherently understand the ancient physics of clay.
Exactly. But the physics of a spinning mass of wet earth do not care about your cinematic fantasies.
They do not. John states the reality was, quote, less iconic and more chaotic.
He frames the experience as a literal battle against a spinning vortex of mud.
And there is a specific line in the text that captures the absurdity of this perfectly.
Oh, the instructor.
Yes. His instructor walks over and gives him what sounds like a simple foundational command. Just center the clay.
Just center the clay. And John reacts by calling this the most difficult task known to man.
Think about how profound that metaphor is, though. Centering the clay sounds so zen.
It does. It seems like a spiritual directive. Just find your center.
Right. But when you are sitting in front of a wheel, spinning at 200 revolutions per minute, and you have absolutely zero foundational motor skills for this medium.
Trying to force a chaotic, heavy, moving object into perfect equilibrium is physically impossible.
It highlights the friction of acquiring a new skill so well. And the physical comedy the authors weave into this section is exceptional.
John describes his lump of clay wobbling aggressively. He says it slumped over.
And then it literally flew off the wheel. Twice. That is how the clay got on his ear. His hobby physically assaulted him.
It became a projectile.
It really did. And after enduring this barrage, what is the end result? Does he eventually conquer the medium like Emma conquer her yeast?
Absolutely not.
He proudly describes his final creation as an ashtray for a giant.
It is completely lopsided. It has a functional flaw with a hole right in the bottom.
And he says it is a ghastly shade of brown.
Which is just awful.
But the absolute cherry on top of this tragicomedy is the reaction of his cat, Toby.
Oh, Toby.
John brings this monstrosity home, places it on the table, and Toby takes one look at it, sniffs it with visible disdain, and just walks away.
The absolute rejection by an impartial judge, even his pet, recognizes the failure.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But this is where John reveals his brilliance. Instead of getting defensive or feeling defeated, he utilizes this incredible self-deprecating defense mechanism.
Right. Emma, who is clearly laughing at his misery, tries to throw him a lifeline.
She suggests, completely tongue-in-cheek, that maybe it's an abstract piece, a profound commentary on the futility of perfection.
And John does not miss a beat. He latches right onto it.
He says, yes, that is exactly what I will tell people. It was a deconstructed vessel.
A deconstructed vessel. He is linguistically rebranding a catastrophic failure as high avant-garde art.
It's a wonderful comedic beat.
It is. But if we dig into the psychological processing happening here, John is actually experiencing something incredibly profound.
Because he admits the piece is terrible.
He admits he failed spectacularly, but then he drops a crucial piece of insight. He says, once I gave up trying to be perfect, I was laughing so hard I was crying. It was cathartic in its own way.
Cathartic? That is a heavy word to drop in a breezy chat. Why does failing so completely, so undeniably result in an emotional catharsis for him?
Because there is a massive, unspoken psychological relief in absolute incompetence.
Wait, really? Explain that.
Think about the burden of potential. With Emma's sourdough, she possessed enough baseline skill that success was a tangible possibility.
So the pressure was on.
Exactly. The pressure was immense. She had to be meticulous because she could actually achieve the perfect loaf.
I see.
John, on the other hand, was so entirely out of his depth. The gap between his cinematic ideal and his physical capability was so vast that the only logical, self-preserving response was a complete surrender of the ego.
Wow. He surrendered to the vortex of mud.
Precisely. In that surrender, the ego dissolves. There is no longer any pressure to perform, to optimize, or to impress the instructor.
He is just a guy covered in wet earth, producing a ghastly brown lump that his cat hates.
Right. The catharsis is the absolute liberation of having zero expectations placed upon you.
The absolute liberation of incompetence. I mean, I think we all desperately need a dose of that.
We really do.
And this contrast, the authors have built Emma's quiet, incremental mastery on one side and John's loud, joyful disaster on the other, is not just for narrative flavor.
No, not at all.
They're using these two archetypes as a bridge to deliver a philosophical thesis directly to you about the nature of modern adulthood.
The text executes a very subtle, intentional gear shift here. It elevates from personal anecdotes to a macro-level societal critique.
Emma delivers what I consider the thesis statement of the entire transcript. After laughing at John's deconstructed vessel, she sighs and says, "We're so focused on being productive as adults, we forget how to simply play and make a mess."
That line is a direct indictment of the daily grind concept they established earlier.
Yes.
The text is forcing us to examine how the relentless machinery of adult life, the constant demand to be efficient, to optimize our time, to generate value, has systematically eroded our capacity for pure, unadulterated play.
I mean, think about your own life, your own weekends. Have we completely ruined the concept of a hobby by turning it into just another arena for achievement?
It's a real problem. Look at the explosion of side hustle culture.
Oh, don't even get me started.
You decide to take up knitting to relax, right? You make a decent scarf. What is the very first thing your friends say to you?
Oh, you should sell that on Etsy. You should start an Instagram page for your knits. You should monetize that.
Exactly. We immediately take an act of leisure and infect it with the pressure of commerce and optimization.
It's so true.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text is offering a highly specific definition of what a true pastime should be. A genuine pastime, it argues, is defined entirely by the joy of the process, totally divorced from the quality or utility of the result.
Like John and his ruined clothes. When he mentions that his jeans are likely permanently stained from the spinning mud, he doesn't sound angry at all.
No, he sounds almost proud.
The stained jeans are a badge of authentic play. He allowed himself to get messy. He reverted to a childlike state of experimentation, where the consequences of failure are basically zero.
Like a child building a sandcastle, they don't care that the tide will wash it away in an hour. The joy is in the building.
Exactly. John failed at pottery, but he notes that he's oddly committed to returning to the class.
His only goal is to eventually make something that can, quote, at least hold water.
He has found genuine joy in navigating a steep learning curve without the crushing adult pressure to become a master ceramicist.
It is a radical rejection of the productivity trap. The underlying philosophy here is that leisure should not merely be a recovery period so that you can return to work more energized.
Oh, that's a trap we all fall into.
It really is. Leisure is the space where you reclaim your humanity by allowing yourself to be delightfully, uselessly inefficient.
Delightfully, uselessly inefficient. I love that. Okay, so we have mapped out the psychological landscape here. We've explored the illusion of control through sourdough,
The catharsis of ego death through pottery.
and the philosophical critique of the adult productivity trap. But now we have to look at the machinery running beneath the floorboards.
Yes, the pedagogy.
We need to transition to the most deviously clever element of this source material. How the authors use these emotional arcs as a delivery mechanism for complex education.
This is where the true pedagogical genius of the transcript reveals itself. The psychology we just discussed isn't the primary goal of the text.
What, it isn't?
No, it is the bait.
Oh, that's brilliant. Exactly. Because as they wrap up their conversation, Emma and John do something highly structured. Emma said, "Shall we do a quick recap?"
And they proceed to systematically rattle off a list of specific vocabulary words.
The target vocabulary list is very deliberate. It's meticulous, patience, precision, meditative, steep learning curve, avant-garde, and cathartic.
Now, if you are holding a standard language textbook, you get this list printed at the top of a chapter with sterile dictionary definitions next to them.
Right. You read it, you try to rote memorize it, and you forget it 3 days later.
But look at the architecture of what this transcript just did. By the time you arrive at this recap section at the end of the episode, you are not encountering these words in a vacuum.
No, not at all.
You have already attached profound emotional weight, sensory details, and vivid narrative imagery to every single one of them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about trying to memorize the word meticulous. A dictionary says showing great attention to detail.
Boring.
Completely forgettable. But through this text, when you hear meticulous, your brain instantly visualizes Emma alone in her kitchen at dawn, anxiously hovering over a jar of wild yeast.
Terrified of baking another brick.
Yes, the word isn't an abstract concept anymore. It is anchored to a high-stakes, relatable narrative.
And this raises an important question about the neuroscience of learning. Why does this method work so much better than a flashcard?
Yeah, what's happening in the brain there?
To understand that, we have to look at how the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center, interacts with the amygdala, the emotional processing center.
Okay, getting scientific, I like it.
Neuroscience tells us that the human brain is notoriously bad at retaining isolated data points. It basically views them as irrelevant noise.
So just reading a list of words is pointless.
Pretty much. We are biologically hardwired for episodic memory. We remember narratives, spatial relationships, and above all, emotional spikes.
So when John tells the story about the vortex of mud and his cat judging the giant brown ashtray, you laugh. Your brain registers amusement.
Exactly. That spike of amusement triggers the amygdala, which essentially sends a signal to the hippocampus saying, hey, pay attention. This information has emotional resonance. Keep it.
The emotional spike acts like a neurological highlighter pen.
That's a perfect way to put it. The phrase steep learning curve hitches a ride on that neurochemical wave.
You aren't forcing the vocabulary into your brain through repetition. Your brain is actively pulling it in because it's attached to a story about a guy getting assaulted by wet clay.
Right. Trying to force rote vocabulary into an adult brain is like trying to install new software on a completely full hard drive. It just bounces off.
But by wrapping these words in the physical comedy of the pottery class and the relatable frustration of the daily grind, the curriculum acts like a zip file.
It sneaks right past the brain's spam filter.
I love that analogy. It's so true.
And beyond just memory retention, this narrative approach solves one of the hardest problems in language acquisition: teaching cultural nuance and pragmatic tone. It is relatively easy to teach someone what a word means technically. It is incredibly difficult to teach them how to use it socially.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Like, look at how the text handles the term avant-garde. That is my favorite part of the whole transcript. If you look up avant-garde, the textbook tells you it refers to new, experimental ideas in art or literature.
But John doesn't use it to describe groundbreaking art.
No, he uses it to describe a disastrous, useless clay lump. He says his pot is avant-garde, and then immediately undercuts his own pretension by adding, or just plain ugly.
It is an absolute masterclass in teaching irony and self-deprecation.
It really is. The text is secretly teaching you that in casual, native-level conversation. Calling your own failed project avant-garde is a polite, sarcastic stand-in for, I completely messed this up.
It teaches the listener how to use humor as a social defense mechanism, which is a massive component of cultural fluency.
Definitely.
Language is not just a sterile tool for exchanging data. It is a dynamic tool for managing social reality.
Right. John uses elevated vocabulary to manage the embarrassment of his physical failure,
Transforming a moment of shame into a shared joke with his co-host. The curriculum isn't just handing you a list of words. It is demonstrating how to wield those words defensively, comedically, and socially.
It is stealth education, operating at the absolute highest level. They hooked you with a relatable complaint about the work week,
Made you visualize a brick of sourdough.
made you laugh at an arrogant cat, forced you to reflect on your own burned-out adult life. And before you even realized you were studying,
They successfully installed 7 high-level vocabulary words and a lesson in cultural irony directly into your long-term memory.
it is a profound manipulation of narrative psychology for the sake of pedagogy. I'm honestly in awe.
It's very impressive work.
Which I think brings us to the end of our own deconstruction here. Just as Emma and John ended their podcast by directly addressing their listeners, it is time for us to synthesize these layers of meaning for you.
The wrap-up.
So what does this all mean? We started by examining a text that disguised itself as a simple, throwaway chat about weekend hobbies.
But what we actually uncovered was a beautifully engineered mechanism.
On one side, it holds up a mirror to our desperate need for control and incremental mastery through the precise, anxiety-relieving science of sourdough.
And on the other side, it celebrates the absolute ego-destroying joy of spectacular chaos through a vortex of wet clay.
Right. And by weaving those two fundamental archetypes of the human experience together, the source material delivers an incredibly potent vocabulary lesson.
Wrapped inside a poignant philosophical reminder to let go of our relentless modern obsession with productivity and perfectionism.
At the very end of the original transcript, Emma and John leave their audience with a simple prompt. They ask them to reflect on a hobby they have either masterfully conquered or spectacularly failed at.
We want to echo that same call to action for you today.
Yes, take a hard look at your own downtime. Where are you gripping the steering wheel too tightly, desperately seeking control and mastery?
And perhaps far more importantly, where are you giving yourself permission to be delightfully, uselessly incompetent?
We encourage you to seek out the value in both the meticulous triumph and the disastrous mess.
And to leave you with a final, lingering concept to ponder, building on the profound themes we've explored today.
Let's hear it.
If, as we've discussed, the true cathartic value of a pastime lies in the absolute freedom to fail, to make a mess without any real-world consequences, metrics, or judgments, what does it really say about the architecture of our highly optimized pressure cooker modern lives that we actually have to consciously schedule playtime just to remember how to fail gracefully?
Oh, wow. That is heavy. But it's true. When the instruction manual is finally thrown out and the muddy waters start to rise, maybe the absolute best thing we can do for our own sanity is to just let the clay fly off the wheel. Usually, when we talk about a photograph, there is this underlying assumption of objective reality. You point a camera at a mountain, the lens captures the bouncing light, the shutter clicks, and you end up with this fixed physical record.
Right. It provides this very comforting illusion of permanence.
Exactly. You can point at that picture and say, there it is. That is exactly the state of the world at that fraction of a second. I mean, it feels like engineering,
Yeah.
It feels clean.
We deeply crave that kind of binary categorization, I think. Captured or not captured, true or false. We want our history, especially our personal history, to be highly visible, perfectly archived, and ultimately unquestionable.
Yeah, unquestionable. But human experience completely resists that kind of sterile archiving.
It absolutely does.
Which is exactly where the camera lens basically shatters. Because the moment you step out of the realm of physical photography and into the world of human memory, and especially storytelling, when we start talking about travel, you realize the landscape is entirely distorted.
Completely distorted. You're describing the architecture of a constructed reality.
Right.
When any of us recount an experience from a trip, we are not just handing over a static photograph to the listener.
No, we're doing a lot more than that.
We're actively painting a picture using our own deeply ingrained psychological biases, the chaotic emotional state we were in at that specific moment, and perhaps most powerfully, the highly specific vocabulary we choose. We use words to frame the event retroactively.
Yeah, the words themselves literally build the memory.
Exactly.
And that concept of language building the memory is the entire engine of our deep dive today. For those of you listening, whether you're commuting, prepping for a trip, or just wildly curious about human nature, we are pulling apart a truly fascinating piece of source material.
Such a great text.
It really is. We're looking at a transcript from an English language learning show. Specifically, it's episode 3 of their curriculum, and the overarching theme of the dialogue is travel.
But we should clarify, we are looking way past the superficial mechanics of a language lesson here.
Oh, absolutely. We aren't doing grammar drills today.
Right. The stated goal of the source text might be vocabulary acquisition for non-native speakers, but the actual execution of the dialogue serves as an absolute masterclass in the human psychology of travel.
It really dissects the contrasting ways we seek out experiences.
Yes, and the defensive mechanisms we employ when we leave our comfort zones, and how we curate the stories we eventually bring home to our communities.
So the source transcript features 2 main characters. We've got Emma and John, and they're not just casually chatting about a vacation. They are deployed as these incredibly stark archetypes for 2 entirely opposing life philosophies.
They really are at opposite ends of the spectrum.
Emma is like the architect of absolute control. She is a meticulous planner. John, on the other hand, operates as this walking, breathing magnet for unpredictable chaos.
A total chaos magnet.
Right. So today we are going to tear into their distinct methods of navigating the world. And we're going to analyze the extremely specific, evocative words they use to justify their journeys.
The contrast the writers of this text create between these 2 experiences is just jarring, but in the best way possible.
It really forces you to look in the mirror.
It forces you, the listener, to confront your own tendencies. Like, are you attempting to domesticate the unknown through sheer logistical force? Or are you surrendering to the whims of an unpredictable environment?
And to give you all a taste of how wild that contrast gets later in our analysis, we are eventually going to break down a sequence where a person's fundamental international identity is compromised on a remote tropical beach.
Which is just terrifying.
Terrifying. And it results in a high-stakes, deeply humiliating negotiation involving a piece of fruit. I promise you do not want to miss the mechanics of how a human being barters with nature to get their citizenship back.
That beach sequence serves as the ultimate stress test for the theories presented in the first half of the transcript.
It really does.
But to truly grasp the weight of that chaotic climax, we have to look closely at how the source text intentionally sets the stage. The very first lines of the dialogue do not treat travel as the mere logistical movement of a human body across a map.
No, it's framed as something much deeper.
It frames the desire to travel as an ingrained, almost involuntary biological and psychological reflex.
Right. Let's look at the specific language there. The transcript opens with Emma noting that the weather has turned. So the physical environment around her is shifting, and she explicitly states that this shift is stirring up her wanderlust.
Which is such a specific word choice.
It is. She starts daydreaming about a, quote, distant shore. And I just found that detail incredibly evocative because it bypasses logic entirely and goes straight to physiology.
Absolutely.
It's like a drop in barometric pressure, a chill in the air, and suddenly her brain is signaling a need for migration.
The causality there is really critical to understand. The text links a macro-environmental change, the turning weather directly to an internal emotional deficit. The use of the word wanderlust here is not just some quirky personality trait. In the context of her dialogue, it implies a deep-seated stirring, like an almost primal itch.
Human beings are so deeply affected by seasonal changes anyway, right?
Yes, our circadian rhythms and hormonal balances shift. So Emma's immediate psychological response to this environmental shift is to seek an escape narrative. But then she makes a fascinating conversational pivot.
Yeah, she doesn't just stick to the daydream.
Right. She doesn't just talk about the act of standing on that distant shore. She immediately shifts the focus to the utility of the trip after it's over. She focuses on the stories they will bring back.
Which prompts John to drop what might be the most cynical but honestly accurate line of the entire transcript.
It's a great line.
He responds, travel stories, the currency of any good dinner party. I practically circled that sentence 3 times in my notes.
It operates as this casual pleasantry in the dialogue, but structurally, it is a heavy sociological thesis. John is laying out the foundational economics of human interaction here. We physically travel to subject ourselves to novel stimuli, certainly. We want to see new colors and taste new food.
Sure, we want the experience.
But functionally, we also travel to accumulate narrative wealth. We are gathering raw experiential data so we can refine it, package it, and spend it later within our social hierarchies.
I want to push on this idea of a dinner party economy for a second. Because if travel stories are actual currency, we have to define the exchange rate. Like, how does a story gain value?
That's the core question.
Because in my mind, a perfectly fine, flawlessly executed vacation story, let's say a glamorous European holiday where the trains ran on time, the wine was exceptional, the sunsets were perfectly timed, that story is basically a $5 bill.
Okay, a $5 bill. I like that.
Right. It is reliable currency. You can put it on the table at a dinner party. People will smile. They'll accept it. And the conversation will just move on.
Yeah.
It buys you a few minutes of polite engagement.
I see the utility in that analogy, but we really have to recognize the limitations of that $5 bill. A story of unmitigated success, of pure luxury, often creates a subtle, alienating effect.
Oh, because it sounds like bragging.
Exactly. It holds baseline social value, yes, but it doesn't foster deep connection. It borders on boasting. We don't generally bond over another person's flawless execution of a luxury itinerary.
But that's exactly my point. The $5 bill is boring. Now, let's contrast that with a cautionary tale, which is the specific phrase John uses to describe his own travel experience.
What about the cautionary tale?
A cautionary tale where the itinerary burns to the ground and everything goes completely off pivot. That is a crisp $100 bill.
It holds much more weight.
You drop a story of absolute disaster onto the dinner party table and the entire room falls silent. Everyone leans in. The social market inherently values disaster over perfection. But why? Like, why are we so desperate to hear about someone else's vacation collapsing?
Well, I would caution against categorizing all disaster as high-value currency. There is a distinct threshold, like a tragedy cliff, if you will.
A tragedy cliff.
Yes. If the disaster involves actual irreversible physical harm or profound trauma, the room doesn't lean in. The room freezes in discomfort.
Oh, right. Yeah. That totally kills the vibe of a dinner party.
That type of story bankrupts the dinner party economy because it demands a level of emotional labor from the guests that they simply aren't prepared to give over appetizers.
That makes total sense.
The high-value $100 bill you are referring to relies entirely on the premise of a survived disaster. It relies on the removal of permanent stakes.
Oh, that's a crucial distinction right there. It's a difference between a thriller and a tragedy. A thriller is fun because you know the protagonist makes it out alive to tell the tale.
Precisely the mechanism at play. When John frames his experiences as cautionary tales, he is offering a highly specific commodity. He is offering a narrative that contains sudden conflict, a destabilization of the norm, genuine emotional stakes, but ultimately survival and resolution.
It's all about the survival.
Evolutionarily speaking, humans are hardwired to pay attention to survival narratives. We listen to cautionary tales to subconsciously download the data. We want to know how our peer navigated the threat so we can apply that knowledge if we face a similar threat.
So we're essentially taking notes.
Exactly. We bond over the shared vulnerability of the human condition.
It's basically a very sophisticated, well-dressed version of cavemen sitting around a fire saying, hey, let me tell you how I almost got eaten by a tiger today so you don't get eaten by a tiger tomorrow.
That is exactly what it is.
The thrill of the danger is the hook, but the survival is the payoff.
And the writers of the source text clearly understand this economic spectrum of storytelling. Emma explicitly states early on that they want their dialogue to cover the entire gamut, from the perfectly planned journeys to the ones that go spectacularly off-piste.
They lay it right out there.
By deliberately setting up this stark dichotomy, the text establishes a framework for the listener. It validates the pursuit of both extremes. It suggests that there is immense value in the friction of the disastrous trip, just as there is value in the frictionless, perfect trip.
Okay, so let's look at the frictionless trip first. We need to analyze the first end of that spectrum, which is Emma's territory. This is the domain of absolute, unyielding logistical control.
And the terminology Emma uses to define her territory is aggressively rigid. She refers to her upcoming trip to Florence, Italy, as a cultural pilgrimage.
I got so hung up on that exact phrase. Cultural pilgrimage.
It's a heavy phrase.
The word pilgrimage carries so much historical and psychological baggage. It completely separates her trip from the concept of a normal vacation. I mean, a vacation implies rest, leisure, perhaps a bit of aimless wandering around a new city.
Right, relaxation.
But a pilgrimage implies a duty. It is a devotion to a highly specific, singular goal.
A pilgrimage requires sacrifice, discipline, and a rigid adherence to a path. And Emma's pre-trip preparation really mirrors the intensity of a religious undertaking. The text details an itinerary that is constructed with an almost frightening level of precision.
Frightening is the right word.
She has the trip planned down to the hour.
Let's just list the logistics she brags about here. She has museum entrance slots pre-booked. She explicitly highlights that she will access the Uffizi Gallery with zero queuing, which, by the way, in Florence is a logistical miracle.
It really is.
She has restaurant reservations secured months in advance. She has even gone so far as to map out her exact walking routes between locations. John responds to this by calling it a military operation, and he admits he finds it both impressive and slightly terrifying.
The military comparison is apt, honestly, because her preparation is fundamentally defensive. She is fortifying her position before entering foreign territory.
Which leads me to my main problem with Emma's approach. When I read about her mapped-out walking routes and her hour-by-hour schedules, I don't see a relaxing trip. I see a massive psychological defense mechanism.
How so?
It feels like she is weaving a suit of armor out of spreadsheets and reservation confirmation codes. She is terrified of the vulnerability of being a stranger in a strange land, so she builds this impenetrable wall of itineraries.
Interesting.
By pre-planning every single step, she effectively isolates herself from the authentic, messy reality of modern-day Italy. She isn't really visiting Florence, she's visiting her own itinerary inside Florence.
Well, I challenge that interpretation entirely.
Really? You don't think it's defensive?
I think viewing her itinerary as an isolating wall fundamentally misunderstands the cognitive burden of travel. You are assuming her spreadsheet armor is designed to keep the authenticity of Italy out. I would argue the exact opposite.
Wait, the opposite?
Yes. The text suggests she builds this structure specifically to let the authenticity in by removing the static noise of survival logistics.
Okay, walk me through that. How does stressing over an hourly schedule make you more open to the experience? It sounds exhausting.
It's an issue of cognitive bandwidth. Specifically, how our prefrontal cortex handles executive function in unfamiliar environments.
Right, the planning part of the brain.
Exactly. When you travel to a foreign city without a plan, your brain is under constant low-level siege. You are constantly calculating things like, where is a safe place to eat? Am I walking in the right direction? Am I going to miss the museum hours? Am I being overcharged?
Oh, that is so true. You're always slightly on edge.
All of that constant micro-decision-making eats up your available cognitive resources. You are too busy surviving the logistics to actually observe the city.
So you're saying that by obsessively planning, she is just front-loading the stress.
Precisely. She is delegating the executive function to her past self.
Past Emma.
Past Emma did the research, made the decisions, and absorbed the anxiety months ago while sitting safely at home. Because past Emma handled the logistics, present Emma arrives in Florence with zero cognitive load.
That's actually brilliant.
She doesn't have to look at her phone to find a restaurant. Her feet just follow the pre-planned route. This creates what she explicitly calls her version of bliss, a state of total immersion in the Renaissance art and history.
Oh, I see it now. The armor doesn't keep the culture out. The armor keeps the anxiety out, which frees up the brain's RAM to actually process the beauty.
Exactly.
And the source text actually backs up your theory beautifully when we look at the sensory vocabulary she uses to describe her time in Florence.
Yes, the sensory details are the empirical evidence that her method works. Because her logistics are, in her own words, seamless, she claims she is able to achieve a state of sensory overload in the best possible way.
And the words the writers chose for her are incredibly intimate. She describes the physical taste of authentic gelato on her tongue. She talks about the visual impact of the sight of the Duomo, specifically at sunrise.
The sunrise detail is key there.
It is, and she brings in olfactory details too, mentioning the rich scent of old leather lingering in the outdoor markets.
Those descriptions are neurologically significant.
Tell me more about that.
Think about olfactory processing, like the scent of leather. The olfactory bulb has direct neural pathways to the hippocampus, which is the center of memory formation in the brain.
Oh, wow.
You cannot deeply encode those subtle, nuanced sensory details if your amygdala is simultaneously firing panic signals because you are lost or late.
Because the panic overrides the subtle smells.
Exactly. This level of granular, multi-sensory presence, where you are literally ingesting the environment through taste, sight, and smell, is only achievable when you feel entirely secure. The rigid, military-grade structure of her itinerary is the necessary scaffolding that supports this delicate sensory vulnerability.
Okay, you've convinced me. The spreadsheet armor works. I take it back.
It's highly effective for what she wants to achieve.
But John, bless his chaotic heart, refuses to let her off the hook. He essentially plays the role of the skeptical listener for us. He interrogates her perfect narrative.
He really presses her.
He actively searches for the track in her armor, asking if absolutely nothing went wrong. He practically begs for a disaster, asking not even a slightly disappointing cappuccino.
John intuitively understands the dinner party economy we discussed earlier. He knows a story without conflict lacks nutritional value for the listener. He is probing for the friction.
And his probing brings us to the pivot point of Emma's narrative arc. The environment finally throws an uncontrollable variable at her.
The real test of the armor.
The ultimate boss fight for any European itinerary. An unannounced Italian train strike. The strike threatens to completely derail her meticulously planned day trip to Siena.
A classic travel nightmare.
Logically, this is the exact moment where the spreadsheet armor should fail. The trains aren't moving. You can't plan your way around a massive labor strike. The friction has officially arrived.
But the friction fails to penetrate the armor.
Because she's too prepared.
Right. Why? Because her foundational philosophy of control extends even to the concept of failure itself. She reveals that she had a contingency plan. She had actively researched the historical probability of transit strikes in the region, and she had pre-saved the contact information for a highly reliable private black car service.
It's almost frustrating how competent she is. Like, really, you researched the strike probabilities.
It's next-level preparation.
Within 20 minutes of the train cancellation, the text notes she is sitting in the back of a luxury private car, smoothly gliding through the rolling Tuscan countryside. She didn't defeat the chaos, she literally just bought her way over it.
The mechanics of her contingency plan are fascinating because they reveal how she frames adversity. For a traveler without means or a plan, a sudden train strike is a calamitous ruin of a day. It means sitting on a station floor for 6 hours.
Eating stale vending machine snacks.
Right. But for Emma, the strike was simply a trigger to execute a secondary protocol. She never lost agency. The narrative of her perfect trip wasn't threatened. It merely shifted into a different, arguably more luxurious lane. She maintained absolute dominion over her time and her comfort.
It's an undeniably successful strategy, and the resulting story is lovely. It's enriching. But it brings us right back to our currency analogy.
Let's hear it.
Emma's story of the train strike is just a slightly shinier $5 bill. She avoided the disaster, which means she avoided the high-stakes conflict.
Yeah.
The dinner party guests are nodding politely, but they aren't leaning in. We are still waiting for the $100 bill. We want the thrill of survival.
And the source material abruptly delivers that thrill. We transition directly from Emma's pinnacle of insulated control to John's narrative, which is defined by an absolute involuntary surrender to chaos.
The vibe change is immediate.
The pacing of the text shifts dramatically. Jopin deliberately introduces his memory as the complete antithesis of Emma's experience.
The setting changes instantly. We leave the heavy, solid Renaissance architecture of Florence, and we drop into a backpacking trip through Southeast Asia.
A completely different world.
John and a friend are attempting to reach a remote, secluded island in Thailand, and the writers use a very specific adjective to describe the transportation that gets them there.
He describes accessing the island via a rather precarious-looking long-tail boat.
Let's look at the weight of the word precarious. Right out of the gate, the text is signaling physical instability. Unlike Emma, who is walking on centuries-old cobblestones or sitting in a solid luxury car, John has placed his physical safety in the hands of a fragile, teetering object. The foundation of his journey is wobbly.
The word precarious establishes a baseline of vulnerability for the listener. It primes us for a structural collapse.
We know something bad is coming.
But immediately after planting that seed of doubt, John deploys a powerful psychological narcotic to lull the listener. He describes the island destination as paradise.
It's a classic bait and switch. He paints the picture of the white sand, the clear water, the ultimate relaxation. He drops his guard completely.
He lets the listener relax.
But this paradise comes with a massive, chaotic caveat. The island is completely overrun by a brazen gang of macaques.
The juxtaposition here is narratively brilliant. It exposes the fragile illusion of the tropical getaway. We project our desire for passive relaxation onto these environments, forgetting that nature is entirely indifferent to our vacation goals.
Nature doesn't care about your itinerary.
The environment shifts from a passive postcard background into an active, hostile participant.
Emma tries to soften the reality of the situation at first. She interjects and calls the monkeys mischievous, which is such a safe, sanitized word. It sounds like something from a children's cartoon.
Right, like Curious George.
But John immediately shuts that down. He corrects her, stating that mischievous doesn't even begin to cover the reality of these animals. And this is where his storytelling becomes incredibly cinematic. He isolates a single antagonist from the gang.
He introduces the ringleader. And notice how John immediately anthropomorphizes the animal.
Oh, he totally gives it a human personality.
He doesn't describe the macaque as a creature operating on blind instinct or hunger. He assigns it complex human motives. He calls it a particularly audacious fellow who had clearly calculated that John was an easy target.
I love the projection there. He is turning a monkey looking for a snack into a criminal mastermind executing a premeditated heist.
It's hilarious, but effective.
But structurally, it raises the narrative stakes immensely. So let's set the scene. John is fully relaxed on the beach. His cognitive defenses are completely down. He is distracted by the stunning view of the ocean. He is committing the cardinal sin of Emma's philosophy. He is not paying attention to his logistics.
And the environment exploits that vulnerability instantly. The kinetic energy of the verbs used in this sequence sharply contrasts with the slow, deliberate pacing of Emma's stroll through Florence.
The language speeds up.
The monkey darts out from the tree line. In a fraction of a second, it snatches John's leather satchel directly from the sand and scurries rapidly up the trunk of a massive palm tree.
It is an explosive burst of violence and speed. The suddenness is shocking. But the physical theft of a bag is just an inconvenience, really.
Just a lost bag.
The true terror, the mechanism that turns this into a $100 dinner party story, is revealed when Emma asks what was actually inside the satchel.
John lists the inventory, a wallet, a pair of sunglasses, and finally, the critical payload, the passport.
Okay, we need to pause and talk about the passport.
Here.
Losing your sunglasses to a monkey is a funny anecdote. Losing your passport in a remote Thai jungle is an existential crisis.
It's a complete disaster.
It reminds me of playing a massive 100-hour role-playing video game. You've spent weeks building your character, acquiring skills, unlocking the map, and then right before the final boss fight, your memory card corrupts. Your save file is just gone. Without that file, your character doesn't exist in the game world anymore. That is exactly what losing a passport feels like. Your ability to navigate the global system is instantly wiped out.
The memory card analogy is highly effective because it captures the systemic dread of the situation. Let's analyze what a passport actually represents psychologically.
It's more than just a booklet.
It is the ultimate symbol of bureaucratic order. It is the physical manifestation of the social contract between a citizen and a state. It proves you have a name, an origin, and a legal right to move across imaginary lines drawn on a map. It is the anchor of your identity in the modern world.
And suddenly that anchor is dangling from the hand of a wild animal 50 feet in the air.
Exactly. To have that profound symbol of human order snatched away by a primate in an untamed jungle represents the complete collapse of the societal structures we rely on. Nature has stripped away his citizenship.
He's just a guy on a beach now.
He is no longer John, international traveler. He is just a biological organism trapped on an island. His immediate psychological reaction perfectly mirrors this systemic collapse. The text explicitly notes that he panicked.
And look at the specific flavor of his panic. While staring at a wild animal in a jungle, he doesn't worry about starvation or physical attack. The text says he immediately envisioned an eternity spent at the embassy, drowning in paperwork.
That detail is a brilliant piece of psychological realism. In the midst of an acute jungle crisis, his brain completely bypasses the immediate physical reality and jumps straight to the crushing weight of bureaucratic infrastructure.
It's so relatable, honestly.
It exposes how deeply ingrained our reliance on the system is. We are more terrified of the paperwork required to prove we exist than we are of the wild animal that stole our proof of existence. We feel entirely erased by the loss of the document.
Erased is the perfect word. So the narrative has pushed us to the absolute brink. We have traveled from the serene, temperature-controlled environment of Emma's black car service to John standing barefoot in the sand, staring up a palm tree at an audacious macaque, holding his right to return home.
Maximum friction.
We have maximum friction. How does he resolve the crisis?
The resolution relies on a complete pivot in strategy, initiated by the introduction of a third character, John's traveling companion, whom he describes as level-headed.
The unsung hero of the story. While John is mentally spiraling into a vortex of embassy forms and lost identity, the friend bypasses the panic entirely.
The friend sees the reality.
The friend looks at the situation, realizes that human bureaucracy means absolutely nothing to a monkey, and drops down to the animal's level. He walks over to a nearby beach vendor and purchases a single banana,
which serves as the catalyst for what John describes as the most bizarre negotiation of his entire life.
We have to stop and compare this to Emma's contingency plan. Emma's backup plan was elegant, modern, and relied on telecommunications and luxury capitalism.
Yes, very polished.
John's contingency plan is primal. He's forced to engage in a rudimentary barter system with a different species. He is literally trading tropical fruit for his international identity.
The text describes the interaction as a tense standoff. Let's break down the mechanics of a standoff. It requires two opposing forces holding something the other wants, locked in a stalemate.
Right.
John has the caloric energy the monkey desires. The monkey has the bureaucratic document John requires. The imagery is dripping with absurdity. John is standing there holding up a piece of fruit like an offering to a chaotic god.
Just offering a banana to the sky.
And the monkey, demonstrating what John interprets as deliberate malice, waves the passport tauntingly from the branches.
It is pure, unadulterated comedy. It is a cartoon sequence playing out in real life. But the text makes sure to emphasize a crucial detail that heightens the stakes for John, the public nature of the interaction. They aren't alone in the jungle. The entire beach has stopped what they're doing to watch this unfold.
The presence of an audience is what transforms the panic into humiliation, and ultimately into social currency. It becomes a shared spectacle. The humiliation is broadcast.
Everyone is watching this guy barter with a monkey.
When the standoff finally breaks, when the monkey decides the caloric value of the banana outweighs the novelty of the blue booklet, drops the satchel, and accepts the trade, John doesn't just quietly recover his property. The text notes he receives a round of applause from the onlookers.
He inadvertently became the floor show for the entire island. The tourists are clapping for him like he just finished a tightrope walk. The emotional whiplash of this entire sequence is staggering. Look at how John summarizes it.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
He explicitly states that in the actual moment, the event was utterly mortifying and terrifying. His heart was pounding, his dignity was gone, his identity was threatened. But then he immediately pivots his perspective to the present day and he says, but now, it's the story everyone asks me to tell.
That pivot is the core thesis of the dinner party economy proven in real time. The terror and the mortification are the raw materials.
The raw ingredients.
Once the event is survived, the brain synthesizes those raw negative emotions into narrative gold. The adversity, the public humiliation, the sheer absurdity of the negotiation, those elements generate a far more compelling, high-value human connection than Emma's story of flawless execution ever could.
The friction creates the spark. He even makes a definitive declaration at the end of his story. He says he wouldn't trade that calamitous, unforgettable moment for anything.
That's a huge statement.
Think about the weight of that. He is looking back at a moment of sheer existential dread, and he values it more than comfort. He wouldn't trade his monkey standoff for Emma's perfect cue-free morning at the Uffizi Gallery.
Because he recognizes that the terror paid dividends. It yielded a permanent asset. And what is truly fascinating is Emma's reaction to his declaration.
Yeah, how does the planner react?
She is the embodiment of planning and control, yet after hearing his story, she yields. She openly admits that while her trip was perfect, John's story is, quote, better.
The architect of the spreadsheet armor bows to the king of chaos. It's a fantastic moment of synthesis. She validates his philosophy without abandoning her own. She acknowledges that serendipity and the specific chaos you cannot plan for has an undeniable aesthetic and social value.
It demonstrates a mature understanding of the travel spectrum we discussed at the beginning. But before we leave the source material, we really must take a step back and examine the metastructure of the text itself.
Right, bringing it back to the English lesson context.
We cannot forget the original context. This dialogue was engineered for an English language learning program. The primary utilitarian function of these contrasting stories isn't just to entertain, it is to embed vocabulary into the listener's mind.
And the writers execute that goal flawlessly by anchoring the vocabulary words to these extreme, highly memorable emotional states. At the end of the transcript, Emma and John perform a brief recap highlighting the key words they used.
Let's dissect these two distinct sets of vocabulary.
We need to, because they act as the DNA for the two philosophies. Let's start with Emma's words, the vocabulary of control. The text highlights meticulously, itinerary, contingency plan, seamless, enriching, immersion.
Let's do a linguistic breakdown of those terms. Analyze the phonetic and structural qualities of the vocabulary of control. Words like meticulously, seamless, immersion, they rely heavily on soft sibilants, the sis and sounds.
They sound very smooth.
Phonetically, they require very little explosive breath to produce. They imply smoothness, continuity, and a lack of jagged edges. Structurally, words like itinerary and contingency are deeply architectural.
How so?
They have Latin roots tied to journeys and touching or connecting. They reflect a mind that has measured its environment, cataloged the variables, and constructed a rigid framework to contain them. These are calming words.
They sound like the vocabulary of a civil engineer describing a perfectly balanced suspension bridge. Like, the structure is meticulous, the load transfer is seamless, nothing is out of place, there is no threat.
Exactly.
But then, we look at the opposing list. We look at John's words, the vocabulary of chaos. The highlighted terms are calamitous, precarious, audacious, standoff, mortifying.
The phonetic shift is dramatic. These words are jagged. They rely on hard consonants, plosives, and sharp vowels.
They hit harder.
Calamitous hits you with that hard C and sharp T. Precarious sounds structurally unstable. Standoff forces a hard stop in the mouth. These words possess a kinetic, nervous energy.
You can feel the panic in the words.
They do not describe a static environment. They describe sudden, violent movement. Audacious implies a shocking breach of social norms. Mortifying implies the death of dignity. These are the words of a survivor scrambling for footing, not a tourist enjoying a view.
So, bringing this back to our dinner party economy, what does this linguistic breakdown mean for us as storytellers? Even if you are a native English speaker, understanding how to deploy this spectrum of words is the difference between a boring anecdote and a captivating narrative.
It makes all the difference.
These vocabulary words are the spices in the chef's kitchen. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine John comes to the dinner party, and instead of using the vocabulary of chaos, he just uses basic functional language. He says, yeah, a bad monkey took my bag, but my friend got it back with a banana.
Well, it communicates the chronological sequence of physical events. It is factually accurate.
It's accurate, but it's unseasoned boiled chicken. It has zero flavor. The listener understands the facts, but they feel absolutely nothing. There are no stakes.
Because basic functional language fails to communicate the internal emotional reality of the event. It fails to convey the systemic dread or the public humiliation.
Right. But when John reaches into his linguistic spice rack and seasons the story, when he frames the animal not as bad, but as an audacious macaque that initiated a tense standoff for his international identity while he was stranded by a precarious boat ride, that elevates the story to a Michelin star narrative.
It becomes art.
The spices make the dish. The words create the value.
What you are describing touches on a mild form of linguistic determinism. The source material is effectively proving its own pedagogical thesis.
Which is?
Building a robust vocabulary isn't just a parlor trick to pass a language proficiency exam or sound intellectual at a party. Vocabulary is the very mechanism by which we capture, frame, and ultimately comprehend the full spectrum of human experience.
We need the words to understand what happened to us.
If John does not possess the word audacious, he cannot fully articulate the specific indignity of the monkey's behavior. If Emma does not possess the word seamless, she cannot fully appreciate the contrast between her planned itinerary and the chaotic world outside it.
That is so true.
Without access to both the vocabulary of control and the vocabulary of chaos, we are fundamentally unequipped to tell the truth about what it means to leave our homes.
Language literally gives shape to the memory. We talked about how memory is a distorted lens at the beginning of the show. John's memory of the monkey theft is funny to him now precisely because he has the linguistic tools to frame it as an absurd comedic standoff rather than a traumatic, helpless mugging.
He rewrites the trauma.
The words he chooses retroactively domesticate the terror.
The framing becomes the reality. The story replaces the raw event.
So as we pull all these threads together, the wanderlust, the dinner party currency, the spreadsheet armor, the monkey standoff, and the linguistic framing, what is the ultimate synthesis we can extract from this deep dive?
The core thesis embedded in this dialogue illustrates that a truly rich travel life, and arguably a fully realized human experience, requires a deliberate embrace of both extremes of the spectrum.
You can't just live in one camp.
You cannot rely solely on one philosophy. You absolutely need Emma's meticulous itinerary sometimes. You need the discipline to construct that spreadsheet armor because that structure creates the mental sanctuary required to fully process profound beauty, whether that's Renaissance art in Florence or a quiet sunrise in your own neighborhood. You must know how to eliminate friction to achieve immersion.
But the text also demands that you accept the inevitability of the calamitous monkey theft. No matter how thick your armor is, the world will eventually snatch your bag.
It will happen.
And when it does, you have to recognize that the chaos isn't just a failure of your planning. It is the forge where your most valuable stories are created. The chaos is where the $100 bills are printed.
On a practical level, the text leaves the listener with a very clear, highly actionable directive. John states it plainly. The moral of the entire exercise is to always have a contingency plan.
Always have a contingency plan. And I deeply appreciate that the source material demonstrates how wildly divergent a contingency plan can be. It isn't always a formalized document.
Not at all.
Sometimes your contingency plan is an elegant, pre-saved phone number for a reliable black car service in Italy, driven by a professional who will whisk you away from the friction of a labor strike.
And sometimes your contingency plan is a level-headed friend standing next to you with a piece of tropical fruit in Thailand. The physical form of the plan is irrelevant.
It's the mindset.
What matters is the psychological flexibility it represents. The true contingency plan is the readiness to abandon the original narrative and pivot the moment the environment demands it.
The readiness to pivot. That might be the single best piece of travel advice ever recorded. And as the source text wraps up, Emma and John turn their attention directly to their listeners, asking them to reflect on their own experiences. We want to mirror that call to action for you right now.
Yeah.
Think about the most unforgettable travel moment of your life, the one that immediately springs to mind.
Analyze the architecture of that memory. Was it a triumph of absolute control? Was it a moment of perfect planning where everything was seamless, enriching, and deeply immersive?
Or was it a disaster?
Or was it a moment of complete and utter structural collapse? Something calamitous, mortifying, and terrifying that you barely survived.
When you sit down at the dinner party, which bill do you pull out of your wallet to pay for the attention of the room? It is incredibly revealing.
It reveals how you interact with the unknown. And looking closely at the mechanics of these high-value stories leads us to a lingering, somewhat philosophical question. It isn't explicitly stated in the vocabulary lesson, but it is deeply implied by the sheer joy John takes in recounting his own disaster.
Oh, lay it on me. What is the implied question?
If our most cherished memories, the high-value narratives that grant us social currency, deep connection, and roaring laughter at dinner parties, ultimately stem from the moments when our careful plans are utterly destroyed, are we, deep down in our subconscious, secretly hoping for a little bit of disaster every time we pack our bags?
Wow. Are we actively praying for the train strike? Are we subconsciously manifesting the monkey attack? Do we build the itinerary just so we can feel the rush of watching it burn?
It challenges the very definition of a successful trip. Is the true luxury of travel actually the seamless, frictionless perfection of a five-star hotel and a pre-booked museum slot? Or is the ultimate luxury simply the physiological thrill of surviving the unexpected and living to tell the tale?
That completely shatters why we bother leaving our houses at all. Because if the goal was just to see the sights perfectly, if it was purely objective, like our camera analogy at the beginning, just pointing a lens at a mountain and capturing the light, there is no narrative there. It's binary. The light is captured or it isn't. The museum is seen or it isn't.
It is clean, it is safe, but it is ultimately static. It generates no heat.
And humans don't want static. We don't want the perfect, unblemished photograph. We want the messy, subjective, terrifying, beautiful, chaotic memory. We actively desire the distorted lens. Because the distortion, the friction, the moment the monkey steals the passport, that is the exact moment the story actually begins.
And as we've learned today, the story's the only currency we truly get to keep.